True hunger, the desire to seek out enough energy and nutrients to meet your body's basic needs, is a hardwired evolutionary survival mechanism. So what is it that causes us to consume food beyond, often way beyond, what is good for us? Let's find out. Hey Carb Dodgers, my name is Dr. Dan Magds. I'm so glad you've landed on my channel. I help people achieve lasting weight loss through low carb, real food nutrition. If that's something that would be of interest to you, I'd love to have you on board. Just hit the subscribe button and click that little bell to get notified whenever I release a new video. Strange question, have you ever had the overwhelming urge to lick an ashtray? Sounds disgusting, right? But back when I was in my final year of training to be a GP, that's exactly what one of my patients came in with. Now, as you can imagine, she was pretty embarrassed about the whole thing. She wasn't a smoker, she really didn't like what she was doing, but she had this overwhelming urge to lick ashtrays and eat cigarette ash. Now, I'd never seen anything like this before, so I asked one of my senior colleagues for some advice, and they said, why don't you run some blood tests? And sure enough, it came out that this woman had a pretty severe iron deficiency anemia. So her cravings to lick the ashtray were her body's way of going about trying to get the nutrients that she needed into her body. And it turns out that this kind of behaviour, whilst rare, is well documented. Needless to say, she much preferred the taste of the iron tablets that I gave her, and she stopped licking ashtrays. You'll probably be far more familiar with the unusual cravings that many women experience during pregnancy. Pregnancy is very demanding on the body and a lot of good nutrition is needed, and cravings are thought to be one of the ways that the body seeks to satisfy some of its nutritional needs. So our bodies are hardwired to change our behaviour to satisfy our basic nutritional needs, even if this does sometimes present itself in pretty unusual ways. And just as we have these systems within our body to stop us under-consuming nutrients, you'd think that we'd have some systems within our body to stop us over-consuming nutrients. And to a certain extent we do. It just so happens that these are fairly weak and easily overridden. And it's only relatively recently in human evolution that we've really had an abundance of food. So we've never really evolved to deal with an excess of nutrition. So what is it that causes people to go beyond this innate sense of hunger? Let's find out. Number 1, conscious overeating. Conscious overeating would involve making a conscious decision to eat despite not actually being hungry. Now, just because this is a conscious decision doesn't mean it's a good decision. And many people force down food despite not actually being hungry on the false belief that it is important to do so. And you might think, why would anybody force down food when they're not hungry? But for many people, breakfast is one of those times when they're not actually hungry, but they believe it's the right thing to do and so eat anyway. Myself included, I used to force down breakfast every morning despite not actually being hungry on the false belief that breakfast was the most important meal of the day. Now, breakfast is a bit of a decisive subject, and I know that some of you are already getting ready to get into the comments and say, but I am hungry in the morning, I really like to eat breakfast. Great, I want you to comment. In fact, I'd like to survey everybody who's watching this video to find out whether they are actually hungry or not in the morning. Just type hungry or not hungry in the comments down below this video. Right, have you done that? Great, let's get on with the video. And so breakfast, whether you love it or hate it, has long been marketed as the most important meal of the day, and that it's absolutely critical to get your metabolism going. And you'll also probably notice that many of the cereal manufacturers also sell brunch bars so that you don't go hungry mid-morning. And conscious overconsumption doesn't end there. Think of those sugary sports drinks that you're told that you need to have after exercise. Now, unless you're an elite athlete with specific nutritional needs, you probably don't need that sugary recovery drink. So there's a lot of misinformation out there about when to eat and what is healthy, and a lot of that comes from marketers within the food industry. Number 2 is eating for pleasure. Now, I hope it doesn't come as a surprise to you, but food is nice, and eating food is very pleasurable. And the nicer that food is, the more likely we are to overconsume it. And on a certain level, it can be as simple as, I'm not really hungry, but there's a cake there. I like cake, I want to eat that cake, and so I'm going to eat that cake. Do we really need to drink anything other than water? Absolutely not. But we do, and we do so because it's pleasurable. One of the chemicals in our brain, dopamine, plays a significant role in pleasure-seeking behavior. And the more pleasurable a food, the bigger the dopamine hit, and the more likely we are to go and seek that food out. So what makes food particularly pleasurable? Now, it's usually a combination of different flavor factors blended together in a certain way. A certain amount of sweetness, a certain amount of saltiness, and a certain amount of fattiness. Think of a buttery salted caramel. Texture is also really important. For example, think of the way that chocolate is solid at room temperature but melts in your mouth. And food scientists have gotten really good at playing with these different factors to make food as perfect as possible, really. They call it the bliss point. And there are research and development departments within food companies that are really good at giving us food that we just want to eat more and more of. Now, this is great for a food company that wants to sell more and more food, but the result is ultra-processed food, which are very high in refined carbohydrates, high in fat, and very energy dense, at the same time offering very little in the way of real nutrition. And this kind of food just happens to be the very worst kind of food for the human body, and eventually leads to weight gain and sets us on a pathway towards type 2 diabetes. Ultra-processed, hyperpalatable foods are everywhere. And they're often very cheap when compared to unprocessed, healthier foods. You often don't have to cook them, you just open up the packet and away you go. Number 3 is reward. Many people will have grown up with food being used as a reward for good behavior, and dopamine's really important here. Ultimately, we learn that good behavior equals a dopamine hit. Exercise is often used as a justification for reward-based overeating. But unfortunately, despite what we're frequently told, we can't simply replace calories burnt with calories earned. Unfortunately, the body just doesn't work like that. But even if it could, people are known to massively overestimate the amount of calories burned in the gym when compared to the amount of calories in the food they're rewarding themselves with. Number 4 is habitual eating. In a perfect world, true hunger would have us eating only when we're hungry and drinking only when we're thirsty. But in reality, we usually eat when we always eat, and we usually drink when we eat as well. And these are learned responses which are strengthened by repetition. Going back to the breakfast example I used earlier, eventually I made my body hungry in the morning. And if you eat a large meal at 7 p.m. every night, then your body is going to prepare for a large meal at 7 p.m. every night. But importantly, these learned responses can actually be unlearned. And much to many people's surprise, if that meal never actually comes, the hormone levels that are making you hungry will drop down. You don't just keep getting more and more hungry until the meal comes. Number 5 is food addiction. Now, whether you can or can't be addicted to food in the same way that people are addicted to other substances like narcotics is a source of great debate amongst doctors and scientists, but I'm really not going to get into that because, quite frankly, it is boring. What is pretty obvious is that people do show addiction-like behavior around food. So currently there is no true diagnosis of food addiction, but I just want to run through the criteria that I use for diagnosing substance addiction. All you need to do is just change substance for food or sugar or something like that. Number 1, do you have cravings to use the substance? Number 2, do you want to cut down or stop but can't manage to? Number 3, are you taking the substance in larger amounts or for longer than you meant to? Number 4, are you neglecting other parts of your life because of substance use? Number 5, are you continuing to use it despite it causing problems in your relationships? Number 6, are you using substances even when it puts you in danger? Now, you can probably see how the last few of those only really apply to alcohol and narcotics use, but I'm pretty sure that a number of the earlier ones will definitely apply to most people who are watching this video. And much of this comes back to the dopamine response. It's all about pleasure-seeking behavior. Number 6 is dehydration. Now, I'm pretty sure you've heard this one. If you think you're hungry, you're probably actually thirsty. Now, when I was researching this video, I wanted to find out whether this was actually true or whether it's just one of those pieces of advice that is so common and overused, we just believe it to be true. And I can't actually find any hard scientific evidence to say that our brains confuse thirst and hunger. Now, the absence of evidence doesn't mean that it isn't true. It might have just not been studied. So hey, if this works for you, then that's absolutely great. But what I did find out is that those hyper-processed foods do actually weaken our thirst response. Personally, I'm much more aware of my thirst since I cut out junk food and significantly restricted my carbohydrate intake, and many of my clients report the same thing. Number 7 is emotional eating. Emotional eating is a huge problem for a lot of people, whether it's through grief, distress, depression or anxiety. Food is a big coping mechanism for many people. And it's often a vicious cycle because the comfort eating often leads to weight gain, which lead to negative feelings towards your own body image, which can lead to, again, more overeating. It's really important that not only do people get appropriate treatment for mood problems that they might have, but that people actually develop non-food related coping strategies. Number 8 is stress. The relationship between stress and food varies very much between individuals. Mild stress can lead to significant overeating, where very commonly when people get very stressed, it often leads to reduced eating. But when people do eat, they tend to go for those hyper-palatable, quick hit kind of foods. And there is a strong correlation between increased levels of the stress hormone cortisol and snacking. Number 9 is sleep deprivation. It's well known that when sleep goes down, weight goes up. When people are sleep deprived, they are known to have higher levels of the hormones that make us hungry. People make significantly worse decisions about their food after a poor night's sleep, and this is really a big problem for people who work shifts. Number 10 is cultural overeating. Cultural eating can take many forms. One thing I see really commonly in places where I work is cake culture. It's Susan's birthday and Susan has brought a load of donuts in for everybody to enjoy and celebrate with her. It would be rude not to. And there's no denying that there's a lot of love and good sentiment that goes behind Susan bringing those donuts in. But the larger your workplace, the more birthdays there are, which adds up to a lot of donuts over time. And of course, the festive seasons are typically a time for significant cultural overeating, particularly in the UK. Christmas is seen as a very gluttonous time. In fact, there are some studies that show that the majority of people's weight gain in a year happens around the Christmas period. And there is a significant correlation between the number of social events attended over the Christmas period and increased weight. It can sometimes feel like there's always something cultural going on where we need to celebrate with food, be it Easter, be it Valentine's Day, be it Thanksgiving in the United States. And many of these cultural events relate back to religious feast days. These used to be balanced with fast days. However, these seem to have been long forgotten in our modern culture. Number 11 is obesity itself. Yes, being overweight can itself lead to increased overeating, and there are several reasons why this is. Firstly, people who are obese need to eat more to get that same hit of dopamine than someone who is of a normal body weight. Secondly, being overweight can lead to negative feelings about your own body image, which, as we mentioned earlier, can lead to comfort eating. But people with obesity often have a hormonal condition called insulin resistance. Now, in a nutshell, that means they need more insulin to do the same amount of work as someone who is not insulin resistant. And if you are obese, you have plenty of energy stored all over your body in the form of fat. But you can't access that because insulin levels are raised, keeping your body in fat storage mode. And this is one of the main reasons that people who are obese often feel hungry most of the time. Number 12 is the dietary guidelines themselves. If you're watching this anywhere in the Western world, it's likely that your dietary guidelines look a little something like this. Eat plenty of whole grain carbohydrates, eat some protein, and eat very little fat. Now, whilst a tiny group of people really seem to do quite well on this dietary guideline, many people really struggle to follow it. And I always hear people saying that it's not the dietary guidelines that's the problem, it's that people don't stick to it. But why don't they stick to it? It's because They can't stick to it because it's an unsustainable diet that humans aren't designed to eat. There was never any scientific evidence to support the introduction of the low-fat dietary guidelines in the 1970s. It was largely politically motivated. Low-fat diets, for many people, simply don't work. Fat is an essential nutrient, unlike carbohydrates, and fat is very filling. And for overweight people who have established insulin resistance, continuing to consume a high carbohydrate diet is only going to make the problem worse. Okay, rant over. That is it for today's video. You've got 12 reasons there why we overeat. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you've got any thoughts about what I've said or think I've missed something out, then please leave a comment down below the video. If you want to find out when I release new videos, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell to get a notification. Until then, have a great week.